And welcome to Big League Dreaming, the podcast, a show about fulfilling your dreams and taking it to the next level. I'm John Gonzalez, and I am so excited because we get to talk baseball again, and I get to be joined by all of my sons. If you're new to Big League Dreaming, the podcast, it's a show about about fulfilling your dreams and taking it to the next level. But it's brought to you by a dad, that's me, and his three sons. And today's podcast is going to be a little different. But I think equally as fun because we're talking about the trade deadline, which was on Tuesday, the Major League trade deadline, which was Tuesday, August 1st, 2023, 6 p.m. And it went down to the wire for some of these deals going down. A lot of podcasts will have already recapped it, right? This is nothing new. So if you're just joining us, our show's a little different. We're fans, but we're also we follow our favorite teams through and through and have our insights on the game as a dad and his sons. Joining me right now live is son number one, Zach Gonzalez, down in Charlotte, North Carolina. Does a little work for the Charlotte Knights. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Ready to talk some baseball.
I know we're ready to talk some baseball. We're also getting ready for a big trip coming up next week, where we
Yes.
get to do three Major League games in 24 hours, and we'll talk more about that a little later in the podcast. But Zach, you're excited about today's format, right?
Yeah, exciting. I'm glad all of us could pitch in and talk about some big trades that happened just the other day.
Yeah, some big trades, big movement impacted Major League Baseball, impacted the lives of these players as well. Not only those in the major leagues, but those in the minors that got traded. So it's interesting. We look at things from that perspective. In fact, if you go back and listen to a recent podcast with Blue Jays assistant hitting coach Hunter Mentz, we talk about the personal side of things. And it's not just all about the numbers and what's going on with the pitchers versus hitters and the rule changes and all that. It is about the personal side of things as well, because, you have to persevere if you want to get to the next level. And part of persevering is what's going on in your personal and your family life. So Zach, right now what we're going to do is we're going to turn this over to son number three, Zane, the Red Sox fan. I'm the Tigers fan. You're the Mariners fan. Zane is the Red Sox fan. And that'll be followed by son number two, Ty, and he is the Mets fan. And those Mets fans are rabid out there. They are intense. I love it. Not that Mariners fans and Tigers fans and Red Sox fans aren't. To be a Mets fan, especially during this trade deadline, I don't know. You have to have an extra thick skin, right, Zach? I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. They got a good return though.
They did, and we'll talk about that in a second. Right now, let's turn this over to Zane Gonzalez, son number three, the Red Sox fan. He'll do a little recap of the Major League trade deadline. All right, take it away, Zane.
All right, the trade deadline has come and gone. All right, today is August 3rd, so we're going to be kind of looking at the trade deadline and what all went down. Kind of the big stories were, to start out, really the Angels. The Los Angeles Angels, they said that they were going to be keeping, Shohei Ohtani. They weren't going to be dealing him at the deadline. So we saw a lot of fire from them early on in the trade deadline. They made some big moves to kind of show that they're really going all out for this year and trying to make a push for the playoffs to keep Ohtani around after this season. They acquired a lot of pitchers. With Dominic Leone was one of them that they got. They got, let's see, they got C.J. Cron, great hitting first baseman. They got Randall Grichuk, who, outfielder that's really been, he's proven himself that he's a consistent outfielder in the league. They also got, obviously, the big one was Lucas Giolito from the White Sox, and they also got Reynaldo Lopez, who's another pitcher from the White Sox. But Lucas Giolito already made his first start, struggled a little bit, but the Angels were kind of out there saying, like, look, we're really selling out for this thing. We want to make a push to the playoffs. We're not going to get rid of Ohtani. We're going to make the most of them while we have them, and try and make a push for the playoffs, and then really sell them after this year, to be able to re-sign them and keep them in LA. Some of the other big stories were probably the Dodgers. The Dodgers made a lot of additions. They added Lance Lynn, Joe Kelly, who used to be on the Dodgers, power arm, out of the bullpen. They also added Kike Hernandez. So Kike was from Boston, my Red Sox, but he kind of really didn't have a place in Boston. It's not that he didn't have a place, it's just their depth was kind of deeper than he needed to really be there and wasn't really getting a lot of chances. And when he did, he was struggling. So, it's probably good for him to go back to LA for the Dodgers. And he's already expressed about, how much he really likes being back in LA and playing at Dodger Stadium. So that's been a really good move for him. The other big stories were kind of the Rangers. The Rangers added Max Scherzer, and that's kind of what the trade deadline is all about. We've seen a lot of news about Max Scherzer coming out and saying that the Mets were going to rebuild and kind of this be a transition year and they're going to be competitive in maybe 25 and looking more at 26. And as he was kind of going through everything, it was like, yeah, trade me if you don't want to be competitive right now. Send him to the Rangers, because the Rangers are looking really good. They're up there in the AL West. They're having a really good season. So they added an ace like Max Scherzer to really help them make that final push to get into the postseason. And once you get to postseason, kind of anything can happen. But we'll kind of get Ty's take on the Mets and kind of where they're at. They're kind of a little thrown off by some of the Mets decisions, but that's kind of the year they've had this year. The Mets sent Justin Verlander back to the Astros. So a lot of movement at the trade deadline, a lot of interesting stories. One of them being Eduardo Rodriguez from the Tigers. They had a deal in place to send him to the Dodgers. He used his no trade clause and kind of brought the trade to a halt, and nothing came through there. I think a lot of people in Detroit weren't too happy. Dad can probably touch on that. The other one that I thought was pretty interesting was Joe Boyle going to the Mariners. So, Zach, I'm sure, is probably going to be happy about that. Joe Boyle, a power lefty arm, 100-mile-per-hour arm that's in the minor leagues. And, I coached him in Kalamazoo for a summer. Great kid, hard worker. I think he's going to do really, really well. And hopefully get up to the big leagues with the Mariners. So, the trade deadline is always an interesting time because, you kind of get an idea of who's really looking to make a push this year, who's really, selling out to make the postseason and make a run at a World Series. And you're also getting a glimpse at, okay, who's not really selling out for this year, kind of sees where they're at and says, you know what, this isn't our year. Let's try and, bolster, our roster with a little bit younger pieces from some minor league guys and some guys that are, right on the line of pushing into the big leagues that can help out in the future and potentially make that push maybe next year or the year after. So that's kind of where the Mets were, and that's what has been talked about the Mets and all their decisions, is they're kind of making a push for 25, 26. So it's going to be interesting to see how all these trades shake out. Obviously, it's a little too early to tell, but I'm very interested to hear, since the Red Sox really didn't do much. And that's kind of was the talk going into the trade line for the Red Sox was, okay, what are they going to do? Are they going to, go all out, go get some pieces? Because the Red Sox are kind of struggling right now. They need some, they don't have a lot of pitching. They have a lot of guys on the injured list. They have, I think, 2 days in their rotation is our bullpen games. So I think a lot of people were hoping they'd go get some starting pitching, and they really didn't make a lot of moves outside of the Kike Hernandez one. And, so you're kind of getting a glimpse into, like, they're in that weird territory of they're doing decent, but they're not doing bad enough for them to start selling off a lot of people. But we had a lot of interesting talk on the podcast for, Ty being a Mets fan. He's going to probably have a lot to say about the Mets and all the moves they made. Dad's probably got some insight about the Erod potential trade that didn't happen. They also sent Michael Lorenzen off to somewhere. And then Zach, like I said, Joe Boyle going to the Mariners, I think that's going to be huge for them. Another trade that I really, really liked was the Orioles picking up Flaherty from St. Louis. St. Louis was a team that, obviously was selling at the trade deadline. They're in last place. They're not looking very good, not what they were supposed to be. So they're kind of one of those teams that are really selling off a lot of their big name guys that are kind of towards the end of their deals, to kind of pick up some leverage pieces to build around going forward. But, it's a lot of talk on this podcast about, the trade deadline and what's all going to shake out. And we'll kind of hopefully see how it plays out, especially with, Scherzer going to the Rangers and Verlander going back to Houston. I think those are going to be kind of the big ones to keep an eye on, as well as the Angels. The Angels are trying to get over the hump and get into the playoffs. So hopefully this is the year, because I think we all want to see Ohtani and Trout, get in the playoffs, because we just haven't seen it yet. I think that's kind of one of those things that if they do get in the playoffs, it's going to be huge for baseball and everyone's going to be watching it. But, all right, Ty, let's kind of get some of your insight on your Mets. I'm sure you're kind of fuming over there.
Yeah, absolutely, Zane. I am fuming over here. All these Mets deals, it was just so crazy to see. It's like, what are they doing? Because honestly, even though they're having a rough season, they're under 500, they're not winning a lot of games. They're starting pitching with Scherzer and Verlander, even though they weren't what they've used to be, like just nonstop, unstoppable, unhittable aces. They've still been having decent seasons. Not the seasons that you would hope for, but it's not like they're doing bad. And their hitting hasn't been bad either. It's really been their bullpen this season. Their bullpen has been absolutely awful. They've been losing games 11-10, giving up 3 runs in the 8th, and their bullpen has been the biggest problem this season, and they've been blowing so many games. So it was really, really weird to see the first guy to go was their closer that took Edwin Diaz's spot, Robertson, to be first off in the trade deadline. And once I saw that, I saw an article, I saw a story. It said Mets are going to start selling everyone, and I was like, no way. Why are you getting rid of your best reliever? Are they really going to just start getting rid of guys? They just need a few guys for the bullpen, I feel like. The hitting's there. Their starting pitching's there. Senga's doing amazing this year. So after seeing that, the reliever was the first to go. I thought maybe they are going to start getting rid of guys. I texted in the group chat, Verlander and Scherzer will be next. And literally the next 2 days, Scherzer left. Zach, you texted me. You said, who will Verlander go to? I said, he's going to go back to Houston, right where he came from. And Zach, you called it. You said Drew Gilbert is their best prospect right now. So if Verlander does go to Houston, that's who the Mets will get. And crazy that literally the same thing we said happened. Scherzer, Verlander, both gone. And also, like, under the radar, the Mets also got rid of Mark Canha, one of their best hitting outfielders they have. And they also got rid of Eduardo Escobar, one of their best defensive players. So it really looks like they're throwing everything to, like you said, Zane, they are rebuilding, like Scherzer said, which is just crazy to me because they spent so much money this offseason. They spent a ton of money, and they're still paying for like a ton of Verlander's contract and a ton of Scherzer's contract. So I can't even believe they must have a lot of faith in these prospects. And honestly, I don't know much about these prospects. Zach, you said Drew Gilbert's really good. They also got Ryan Clifford, but it just to me, it just is unbelievable. You're paying so much of Scherzer's contract still, and you don't want him, and you just want a prospect. Like, I can't believe they didn't try to get more, But that's kind of my take on the whole Mets thing. It's just kind of weird to see as a fan for me. I was never really a fan of the whole rebuilding thing, especially when you look so good on paper at the start of the season. Everyone was like favoriting the Mets to win the division, make a good run for the World Series. Obviously, they've had a really bad season, but if you look that good on paper and you're just having a bad season, I don't understand why you would just start trading players at the trade deadline. To me, it doesn't make sense, especially with all the money they're just wasting. I don't know how they have so much money, but it's going to be interesting to see if the Mets try to make any moves this offseason to get some more younger guys. I'm glad they didn't get rid of McNeil, Lindor, Alonso, anything like that. So they kept a main chunk of their offense, which is good, but getting rid of Canna, I mean, that's a guy that hits 300 almost every season. He's getting on base. So I don't know about that, but yeah, it was just really really weird to see. Like, it's been a weird season for the Mets, just kind of seeing everything unfold. Being way under 500, being almost 20 games back is something nobody expected. But other than that, that's kind of my take on the Mets trade deadline. Zach, I got to know what's going on. Are these prospects worth it?
Are they worth it? That is the multi-million-dollar question, Ty. I'm glad you asked. I was impressed with some of the players that the Mets got in return for, letting these guys go. Like you said, Verlander, Scherzer, Robertson. They really beefed up their farm system in a matter of 48 hours, it felt like. I believe the biggest one that you're going to see talked about is Acuna, for sure, Ty. He was acquired from the Rangers for Max Scherzer. I feel like when the new top 30 prospects come out by Major League Baseball, he is going to be your number one prospect in the Mets farm system. And then yes, we did talk about Drew Gilbert. He was the Astros number one prospect outfielder for Houston. And Drew Gilbert is only one of the pieces that the Mets got in return for Justin Verlander. They also got another outfielder, Ryan Clifford. Now, these two guys, I think they'll definitely both be in the top 5, top 30 prospects for the Mets. Probably Gilbert a couple notches higher than Ryan Clifford. But Clifford can also play first base. So we'll see what they end up doing with Ryan Clifford. But they're both going to be top 100 prospects, in my opinion. Another guy that snuck in there for the Mets was Marco Vargas, a little infielder who has a great hit tool that they got from the Marlins for David Robertson. So Vargas is a guy that I like a lot, little second baseman. I think he could do some things for the Mets in the future. He'll probably be a top 10 prospect for the Mets as well. So they got a good return. Dad, do you know some of those prospects? Have you been following a little bit at all?
I have heard about some of those prospects. I was interesting to see that Clifford hit a home run in his first at bat as a Mets prospect. So I saw that. He's got a great swing. I think he might be the undervalued one. I mean, Gilbert is the bigger name, right?
Right.
And Acuna, bigger name as well. I'm also intrigued by Acuna because I know you like hear that name, you're like, okay, what's his first name? Luis Angel,
Yeah.
Luis,
and he's a totally different type of player than his older brother, like he's a little infielder. He's not a big outfielder.
No, he steals bases. He's got some power to the gaps, but yeah, he's a completely different player altogether. So, which I think is cool because you look at you guys, right? My 3 sons, the 3 boys, you guys all had different physiques, different styles of play, the way you approach the game. You still, I mean, all 3 of you are heady, knowing the game. You knew the game of baseball, right? So, he knows the game. Acuna is going to know the game of baseball and have a good baseball smarts, but he just has a different skill set. So, I think the comparisons will be there, but then again, the baseball fan will. So yeah, I'm like, I agree with you. I think for the Mets, I see what they were doing. They weren't going anywhere with this building, with huge contracts and big names. I think it's proven that if you can get good players, groom them, to fit into what you're trying to build, and teach them along the way, and I think you can have some success with that. But we'll see, right? Their experiment failed in a big way. And but they still, they still have an outside chance to make the playoffs. That's the scary thing, and they've got to get on a winning streak, not a losing streak. They just lost 3 games to the Royals. You just got swept by the Royals.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, Bobby Witt Jr. is on a heater right now.
Yeah, I just think the Mets. Ty got so passionate there about it. Those Mets fans are. I kind of wish we were going to a Mets game this year. Can you imagine being at the ballpark?
Imagine going to a Mets game in April and then one in September.
Speaking of which, I know we're going to talk about some of the other big. Zane mentioned a few of big trade deadline players that went to teams, and obviously, people are going to be talking about it. But look at last night, though. I mentioned this to you off the air. Last night was a big night. So last night, the game's on August 3rd, big night for these trade deadline players. Let's start with Max Scherzer. Gives up 3 runs in the first inning as a Texas Ranger. You know, those Texas fans are like, what? We just got this guy? But you know, Max, you and I have seen him play since the beginning, right? When he was with the Tigers, and we see, you know, his attitude and the way he is. He's a bulldog out there. He gives up 3 runs and he settles down, and the Texas goes on to win 5-3. So that's Max Scherzer, what you're going to get, right? He's a competitor every pitch, and he's going to, so he goes out and wins. Jack Flaherty, which, you know, is a great pickup for the Orioles. He goes, let's see, he gives up, how many runs?
Well, 6 innings, right?
He went 6 innings, 8
Only gave up
strikeouts.
1 run.
Yes, and they won 6-1 over the Blue Jays. And the Blue Jays are limping along here. They lose 3 of 4 to Baltimore, and they can't afford to lose those games, right?
Yeah, and Flaherty was a big gamble. I mean, he had a lot of success early on in his career, and then he had some injuries. And coming back this year is like his first year back. Didn't really know what they were going to get out of him, and he's been like up and down. Like he'll have a couple dominant outings in a row, and then he'll just get lit up. So it's really up and down. He was like a big target for a lot of teams because you can get him for fairly cheap because you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
But when Flaherty's on with that off speed that he has, he can be very dangerous. So the Orioles just got even better. They're just so good.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch that race unfold in the American League East. And I think a surprise for a lot of people will be, I mean, maybe not a surprise for the baseball people, but, you know, the Phillies win 4-2 under the arm of Michael Lorenzen. And you're kind of like, wait a minute, Lorenzen's the Tigers guy, right? He was an all-star for the Tigers. And I think he's in his 5 starts in July. Part of the reasons why the Marlins wanted him, part of the reason why they wanted him is that he has the Phillies. They played the Marlins last night. The Phillies wanted him is that he had a 1.14 ERA in the month of July in his 5 starts. I mean, he's coming into his own. It's like making the All-Star team just gave him that extra boost that he needed, right? It's like, I can do this. And I was listening to some of the Phillies post game last night because I was in a massive rainstorm driving home, and they were just talking about like he was on. I mean, the Lorenzen slider was unhittable, right? I mean, they just couldn't do anything. I believe he pitched. Here's the interesting thing about that game, and I know we got some more trade stuff to talk about. He gave up a run in the bottom of the 7th inning, right? And the Phillies were already up 4-2. And you know how it goes, right? He gets out of the inning to go to the 8th. Most managers in the major league are pulling your starter at that point, right? He goes out and pitches the 8th inning to give the bullpen a rest. You talk about a bulldog. That's a guy that's like, you know, zoned in. And so it's going to be fun to watch the Phillies and see what they can do here as the postseason gets near.
And the Marlins too, because the Phillies and the Marlins, they're battling each other, right? Because they're not going to catch the Braves.
Right.
The Braves are going to win the East.
Yes.
So they're trying to go after, you know, hosting in that wild card series. They're battling literally against each other. They're only a half game apart or so. They're very close. And I love what the Marlins did at the trade deadline. So I was telling you this before I started recording. So the Marlins got first baseman Josh Bell from the Guardians. They did have to give up Gene Segura and Khalil Watson. I do like Khalil Watson. He's a good little infield prospect. They also got Jake Berger from the White Sox. He's a fan favorite, Charlotte Knight here. Mm-hmm. And love seeing Jake Berger put it together. I think he has 25 home runs this year. He's having a great season. So he can play third base and first base. I know the Marlins are going to have him at third since they just got Josh Bell from the Guardians. And the Marlins' former first baseman was Garrett Cooper. And since they knew Josh Bell was coming in, they actually moved Garrett Cooper and got a starting pitcher for him, Ryan Weathers from the Padres, who has had a slow start. He's been up and down in the minor leagues. Just like they call him up to start and send him back down to AAA. But he's an interesting arm. And then they got David Robertson from the Mets, like we said. They did have to give up Vargas, but the Marlins, I feel like, did a lot more than the Phillies at the deadline, which they had to do a lot more. I feel like the Phillies are a little bit better team, but yeah, Marlins could be a team to watch here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's fun. That's the thing about the trade deadline, right? It kind of it changes the narrative of what you're going to do for the rest of the season, and has huge impacts. And like we said earlier in the podcast, it also impacts the lives of these minor leaguers who, they think one day they're doing this, the next thing they're doing that. I mean, Clifford said he didn't realize he was going to be traded, right? And all of a sudden he's in a new city. He's in Brooklyn. So
yeah,
there you go. Your Mariners, what's going on with them?
They made some moves.
What's going on with your Mariners? I mean, they still have a chance, I guess, outside chance, right? To make the playoffs.
It was almost like the front office believes in their offense so much. It was kind of like the best trade we can make is not make a trade. The bats that were out there, like Mark Canha, Tommy Pham, like those kind of guys, they went for cheap. You just give a prospect and you can get those guys and bring them in. But I feel like they believe in Ty France. They believe in Tasker Hernandez. If those guys can turn it around, then those hitters are a lot better than a Tommy Pham or a Randall Grichuk. So they're kind of banking on that happening. But they did trade their closer. They traded from their strength. They traded Paul Sewald, who's been our most reliable relief arm the whole season. Sewald is a part of the Seattle community. He's a great guy. He came from nothing. Like, he was with the Mets struggling. He came over to the Mariners. They changed his pitch usage. Fastball's up in the zone. He's only 92, 93. And he became almost an all-star level pitcher really overnight as soon as they called him up with Matt Brash. Not with Matt Brash, sorry, with Logan Gilbert. So really sad to see him go, but they did get 3 guys for him. Considering he came from the Mets for like nothing, to get 3 players out of him is pretty impressive. They got Josh Rojas, who's a proven little infielder. He's okay. They got Dominic Canzone, who is a first baseman outfielder, which we're weak at those positions, so a little bit of depth. He could be good. He's already up with the club, playing every day with the Mariners. And then they got a little infield, Ryan Bliss, a little infield prospect. Literally, he's little. He's 5'6", next Altuve kind of guy.
Shorter than me. I love it.
Yeah.
Already.
He's a 2024 guy. He could come up in September and play some second base because the Mariners are so weak at second base. So they got a fairly good haul for Sewald, but it is tough to see him go. Mariners have been known for their bullpen arms, bringing these guys out of nowhere, and they come in and they're just lights out. So they're kind of hoping that they can keep that going and get on a streak here. They beat Ohtani last night. They won 3 games in a row, and they're only 2.5 out of the wild card. So see what happens.
You'll see what happens. Yeah, it's been up and down for you guys too, because you always feel like you're on the edge. You're on the cusp, right, of like crossing over and being one of those teams. But the Angels too, I think we were all surprised I was surprised, because remember, I predicted that Ohtani would be traded. My prediction was way wrong. Not only did he not get traded, they went out to get people, and a week before the trade deadline said, we're not trading him. And then Ty says to us that, Verlander and Scherzer are going to be gone. And we're like, yeah, right, whatever.
Yeah.
The Mets aren't going to do that. And sure enough, he was right. I was like,
they sold it all.
They sold it all. As far as my reaction to the Tigers, I thought the Eduardo Rodriguez one was really interesting. This was GM Scott Harris's first trade deadline. He's coming up on his 1 year with the club as the new general manager. I love a lot of things he did in the offseason. Our bullpen is for the Tigers actually really good. And I was surprised a few of them didn't get taken, right? Like Lang didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Which I was surprised, because a lot of teams need bullpen help. So the Tigers, without Eduardo Rodriguez, we don't have an ace. So it was great to see him. But you think about what prospects we missed out on the Dodgers, from the Dodger system that we could have brought over to help bolster the team. So I think a lot of people feel that Scott Harris blew it with not being able to trade Eduardo Rodriguez at the trade deadline to get some young talent. But on the other hand, there are those like myself that would say, you know what? You don't trade him. He stays. He likes Detroit. Doesn't want to disrupt his family. That's one of the reasons he said he didn't want it. That's why he rejected the trade to the Dodgers, is because he didn't want to disrupt his family life, which I think is really cool. And he can opt out after the end of this year. But I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I'm not good at predictions. I wouldn't be surprised if he sticks around because we do need an ace and we can build around him. We'll see. We'll see what the Tigers, what they do here at the end of the season. They still play in the American League Central, which I keep saying, and that's always a bonus for us.
Yeah, that was really interesting that he stopped the trade basically.
Yeah.
You don't see that a whole lot. I mean, those guys have those no trade clauses, but when they realize that the team is selling, they're kind of like, all right, I want to go win a championship. I'm out. So, yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that his agent tried to negotiate. What we're hearing is that the agent tried to negotiate more money for him, but at the end, it's like, I don't want to disrupt my family, which I believe is true. And there's a lot to be said about that. He just got his family settled into Detroit. They like it. So
yeah,
we'll see how that all works out for the Tigers. Max Clark got a big hit in this first major league first professional at bat, so that's good. We'll see how the prospects come along. I should say, if you're a Tigers fan and you want to read up, my friend Jeff Seidel from the Free Press has a really good article right now looking at the 1-year anniversary of the new general manager, Scott Harris. You can go to freep.com, you can find his article, and he brings up a lot of these intricacies of what's been going on behind the scenes with his first year and his philosophy of building this Tigers team, this franchise back. It's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. But he does a good job. So check out Jeff's article in the Free Press.
So you want to just touch on a couple of the other big trades that went down? And
yeah, sure. Yeah. What do you have on your list there? Yeah.
Yeah. So Angels acquired Lucas Giolito from the White Sox for a couple prospects. He got lit up his first outing for the Angels. Dodgers also acquired Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly from the White Sox. I think Zane touched on that one. Blue Jays acquired Jordan Hicks, closer for the Cardinals. Well, he wasn't the closer at the beginning of the year. That was Ryan Helsley, but Helsley was injured for some time. He's on the IL right now. So Hicks went into that closer role for a little bit. But Blue Jays have Romano, so I think Hicks will just be a setup guy for them, which they already have Eric Swanson, but good to have some, another arm back there, and Hicks, 101, 102. It's crazy. A name to watch out for, Dad, Kyle Manzardo. So I'm really high on Kyle Manzardo. He has a great hit tool, first baseman, a huge Rays prospect. And the Rays are just loaded on the infield. So the Rays sent Kyle Manzardo to Cleveland, sorry, Dad, for Aaron Savali, starting pitcher. So Rays got Savali back. Guardians have their first baseman of the future, Kyle Manzardo. Like Ty said, Brewers got Mark Canha from the Mets for Justin Jarvis. I do like Justin Jarvis, Ty. I think he's a good depth arm. He'll probably be, I don't know, maybe top 10, just outside of the top 10 Mets prospect. Candelario, Dad, I know you saw that one. Went to the Cubs from the Nationals for a couple prospects. And then Braves got a relief arm too, Brad Hand from the Rockies.
Cubs are an electric team right now. I watched some of the game last night after I survived that rainstorm, and they're loving Candelario being there, but the place was electric. They pulled out a big win last night, and they're one of the hottest teams in baseball. I think they're 8-3 in their last 10 games. I don't
8-2.
I'm sorry. I say 8-3 in the last. I can't even do math. 8-2 in their last 10 games, which is really incredible to see. I have a friend that has season tickets, and he's like, oh, I couldn't get anybody to come with me tonight for whatever reason. He was like, I got 3 empty seats. I'm like, dude, why don't you just text me? I just would have survived the rainstorm and gone right to Chicago, right?
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's going to be fun to see the Cubs. I mean, actually, battling it out here at the end.
Yeah, they kept Cody Bellinger, which was a big bat that was going to be available. And that's one thing that Jerry Dipoto said when he was talking about how the trade deadline went for the Mariners. He was like, the big bats that were like kind of the bats that could really push you over the edge were not available. So when, the guys that were just like those bats that I mentioned, Jace Peterson, Mark Canha, that will move the needle a little bit, but not really push you over the edge, he was like, we're going to believe in our guys.
Yeah, I feel bad for the Blue Jays because with Bo Bichette going down on the IL, and they were able to squeeze a deal in at the last second, but they were kind of not prepared for that, right? And,
yeah.
I worry a little bit about the Blue Jays. I listened to the Blue Jays post game last night too on my drive. What a drive, right? And they were not happy. The Blue Jays fans were like, the Blue Jays guys that were doing the show, they were ready to throw in the towel. And I'm like, you guys are still in the hunt. I don't know what is your problem, right? They just like, we're talking about everything that could go wrong. I hate shows like that. Let's just be a little more positive about things, right? What if Paul DeYoung just goes on a tear, right?
He might. What if Paul DeYoung gets hooked up with Hunter Ments and they go off?
Oh, and they were critical of the hitting coaches too. they were just like, I'm like, come on, I can't be all this negative. I just can't do it, right?
It's got to be hard. You have all that star power. Springer is like, he can't hit right now. He's very cold. So it's got to be tough playing in the East, and you have all those big names, and you're just still and battling for a wild card yet another year.
They were also talking about Vladdy getting up to bat, and they're like, who would fear him right now? Who would fear him? I'm like, oh, geez, settle down, They've turned his swing into something you don't even fear anymore. And I'm like, settle down. I don't know. That's just the way things are, I guess, these days. But no, I love your insight. I love hearing from Ty and Zane. They all have great baseball minds, and as you do too. So it's fun to hear things like a realistic prospects are prospects until they can make it in the major league. But it really comes down to like, can you adjust at every level, right? Can you adjust to the atmosphere? What's happening on what's going on with your family? All that stuff. I mean, I know we love the numbers and analytics games, but there's something to say about playing with a little heart, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like there wasn't as much movement this year for the trade deadline as years past. I don't know, I could be wrong, but the bats were not available. The prices for these pitchers were very high. Going out and getting these guys, you're having to give up, one or two of your top 5 prospects. Just insane.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it for Big League Dream, the podcast. We really appreciate you tuning in. We'll be back next week with our baseball special, our ballpark tour. 3 games, Zach, in 24 hours.
Are you ready? Can you hang? Are you gonna fall asleep in the bleachers, Dad?
I was just talking to a friend of mine. I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna do day 2. Day 1, I think I'll be good, right?
Because it's gonna be those flights. It's gonna be those flights. Day 2, that morning is gonna be tough.
That morning is gonna be rough. That whole day 2 is gonna be really rough. 2 games in one day. And I was just looking at the plan. I'm like, I hope these are fast. I hope the Brewers play a fast afternoon game on August 9th, because we got to be back for an 8:00 game in Chicago that night. So
against the Yankees too.
Yeah, so we see what we got. Baltimore. Who does Baltimore play at Camden Yards?
The Astros. So get ready for me to be booing the entire time.
Are we going to see Verlander? I don't know when his first start will be.
It's probably too early to tell, but we should know this weekend.
Yeah, and then we get Milwaukee plays the Diamondbacks. No, they play the Rockies.
Rockies.
Yeah.
Rockies. See Chris Bryant.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And then
the Brewers are in first place, so it'll be fun to see Brewers play.
We get to see 2 first place teams.
I was talking about how the Orioles and Astros matchup is a preview of the ALCS.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun game to watch. I can't wait to watch those young players too for Baltimore.
Yeah,
and see what the crowd's like there. So, all right, that's it again for Big League Dream, the podcast. To come back next week where we will obviously talk more about our baseball tour and plenty coming up down the road. We've got some other interviews planned that we hope you tune in for.